Thank you, Asala, for hosting this event. I'm Lahnice Hollister, and I'm here to share with you a book that I edited and published called Resisting Jim Crow, the autobiography of Dr. John A. McFall. Unlike the other accomplished authors that you will be hearing from today and in the future, I am not the author of this book. John A. McFall was the writer. He died in 1954. I found this manuscript in 2018 in the Fisk University archives. And I published this manuscript because I found it to be unique and fascinating, as well as timely. Why unique? Well, one interesting thing is that John did not intend for this manuscript to be published. He had written it only to satisfy a request by his children. It's also unique because it's a firsthand account. And John lived at a time that was a time of transition. John McFall's parents had been enslaved. His parents, his grandparents, aunts and uncles, his neighbors had been enslaved and had been emancipated. They expected to have full citizenship. In fact, they had lived with full citizenship for almost 15 years. But by the time John was born in 1878, he in fact came of age through the 1880s and 1890s. And instead of witnessing full citizenship of his family and his community, what he did witness was white supremacy, Jim Crow, and segregation. He watched these evolve and mature. It's a fascinating time because John was the first child of an enslaved couple, of a formerly enslaved couple. And even though he was their first child, he aspired to obtain an advanced degree. And one might wonder, how did that happen? One might wonder why I decided to publish this manuscript. Well, I wanted John to tell his story. It was not out of a sense of ancestor worship. People who know Charleston, South Carolina, which is where John lived, or who don't know Charleston except through the colorful brochures, will learn about Charleston. They'll learn a different flavor of Charleston as well as a Southern city, and they will hear it firsthand rather than it being filtered by others. These are John's parents that you see, Mary Ann Hargrove and Thomas Alston McFall. John was the first of 11 children. Mary Ann, because of my own research as a family historian, I know Mary Ann's family going back to 2 generations before her. So John actually knew his not only grandmothers, but also knew great-grandmothers. What you see now is John at 2 different phases of his life, which I'm sure you can tell. One side, you see his graduation photo from the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy. On the other, you see John later in life. And I want to bring your attention particularly to the fact that he's wearing glasses. And you can also see something about his eye here. And I'm going to return to this later in this presentation. John, as I mentioned, lived through some interesting times in our nation, and he wrote about them in a great deal of detail. So here is a timeline of John's life. This is an addition to the book that I made, or to his manuscript. And you'll find in this, just to mention a few items, that he participated in the South Carolina exposition. This was actually, according to John, the very first time that segregation, that is to separate the races, became at an event actually occurred. So we assume, I think, that cities, Charleston would have been segregated already by this time, but we find, just like almost any other event, that it evolved. It didn't just happen at a stroke on a particular day. So one of the things I really want to point out is that John became very civically active. In 1936, 86 years ago, almost to the day that we are in right now, John gave a speech at an interdenominational and an interracial program to discuss or talk about race relations in Charleston. And a newspaper reported on his talk. And what it said, that he said, was, racial injustice is a cancer on the vitals of the nation. That was 86 years ago. And that is why I wanted to point out what a timely manuscript this is. I made the point shortly ago that this manuscript, why I wrote this manuscript, was not out of a sense of ancestor worship, but I wanted to bring to you that a distinguished professor, Dr. Orville Vernon Burton, sent me a great deal of text telling me that he thought that this manuscript was a remarkable achievement, that John was someone whom he would have liked to have known. We see here a school that John could have definitely attended the Simonton School. And in fact, this was a photo taken not long before John would have actually attended the school. So I wanted to show you that John was actually educated. His mother, his parents ensured that he received a formal education, and he received that at the Simonton School and the Avery School. The other thing I wanted to point out is that John was surrounded by people who served as wonderful role models to him. And the way they served as role models to him was that they could tell him some of the very challenging experiences they had. For example, he worked for Alonzo McClellan at a pharmacy before he went off to college. And Alonzo McClellan was the second African-American man to go to the Naval Academy. He attended it in the 1870s. John describes his time at the Naval Academy as one that you would say he was persecuted. Alonzo McClellan wrote about his time at the Naval Academy, and in fact, today we might call it terrorized. So John was around men like these, not only at Avery and in Charleston, but also when he attended the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy. And here you see a picture of him in a class in which he was the only American in a class of 200. I think that John was very brave to even do that. And in some ways, I wonder why he decided to attend this school versus Howard, which is where his mentors, Dr. McClellan, as well as Dr. Minton in Philadelphia, had attended. But I believe he may have thought that this was the best school that he could go to. This is a photo of John's drugstore. When he was at the pharmacy school, he was there for 3 years without returning home during that time. He was pretty much on his own living there. When he says in his manuscript that he would have liked to have gone on to become a physician, but his father was expecting him back home in Charleston to open up a drugstore. And so that is what he did. And here is a picture of the drugstore that he opened not long after returning to Charleston. His parents mortgaged their house, and that is what he used to outfit the store. And he had such a remarkable memory that as he describes outfitting the store, he actually tells you the cost of the items, from the signs to having the inside painting done to buying prescription pads. He did run out of money, and thankfully, Dr. Baer, who was his father's employer, allowed him to open a line of credit. In fact, I should tell you that Dr. Baer, his dad's employer, is the person who paid John's tuition for the 3 years. He gave John a loan, which he said was at very generous terms, and which he paid back. I showed you a few moments ago, I said that you could look at John's eyes. At one point, John says he went to his mother as a young boy and told her that, or asked her if everyone could only see out of one eye. She was quite alarmed, and according to the manuscript, she took him to an eye doctor. I asked a friend of mine who was an ophthalmologist, to read what Dr. McFall wrote and if he could diagnose him. And he did, and he diagnosed it as hypoplasia and strabismus, which would have given him very poor eyesight in his eyes. So interestingly, John may have very well been nearly blind in one eye, and consider that all of the close work that he would have done as a pharmacist and even studying in school. One additional point that I want to make is I got very interested in the doctor who treated John, because he mentions going to the eye specialist. And what I found about the specialist is a paper that appears online in which he says, during the last days of slavery, the master was jealous of the good health of the slaves, and goes on to say that basically the slaves were well fed and clothed, but they became more diseased because of freedom. Because of freedom, they had evil habits and were actually in much poorer health in the 30 years that they had become free. I have much more to tell you, but I'm afraid I'm out of time. Thank you very much for your assistance.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Joye Shepperd, and I'm the author of a book entitled A Good Ending for Bad Memories. First of all, I'd like to thank the Association for the Study of African American Life and History for allowing me to participate in their Festival of the Book. I feel like the stepsister, in a sense, who snuck into a fabulous party with so many authors with amazing stories to share. In particular, stories that focus on so much of the strictures that still characterize much of African American life in the United States. We are fortunate to be so amazingly resilient. And before I begin to speak a little bit about my particular story, I would like to thank ASALH again, because they are the creators of Black History Month. And one thing I have always loved is Black History Month. When people ask, why do we still have Black History Month? Why do we need this month? And haven't we come far enough in this American culture not to have to put this kind of emphasis on American in this way, on African Americans this way? I have an easy response. Is there ever a time when we should give up learning, when we should give up the learning about ourselves, and should we ever give up learning about African American history in particular, which is indeed American history? You know, I have this fantasy from time to time, and I wonder what the United States would be like if we'd embraced everyone's culture from the very beginning. I'd like it to invite everybody to take a few moments just to imagine what it would be like. And only if well imagined could you hazard a different response. The theme of this month for ASALH is Black health and wellness, which is also a theme in my book. I'd like to tell you how A Good Ending for Bad Memories came to life. For me, books to come together kind of like recipes, and you have a variety of ingredients, a little something here and there. And as the writer, you have to put them together in a serviceable way. For years, I've pondered the effects of cruelty, and primarily from the standpoint of slavery, and not only from the perspective of the victims, but also from the perspective of those who practice cruelty, the slave owners. I believe that the wounds cut us deeply in both directions. I imagine that the experience had to be not only horrific for the slave, but also for the slave owner, who must have spent a part of every day trying to overcome the part of their spirit that should have naturally been outraged and would have been outright revolted at the prospect of having to treat another human being in such a fashion. This would be the case for anyone claiming to be human. Imagine you must spend a part of every day on your plantation, tamping down your humanity until it became easy. Unfortunately, the practice of besting our humanity has forever damaged this American society, and the injury has not yet healed. Let me tell you, first of all, that I know very little about medicine, but I think if you sacrificed your humanity by practicing cruelty, it just might become encoded in your genetics. I know it sounds preposterous, but it also happens to be a pretty good explanation for why such easy acts of cruelty still constantly occur in our society. The men that shot Arbery had no humanity left, and neither did the gentleman who kneeled on another man's neck. If it were not easy to separate ourselves from our humanity, I don't think these moments of inhumanity and thoughtlessness would still occur. And for the victims, for the slaves themselves, what in the world must it do to your psyche to have witnessed acts of cruelty on a regular basis? This too, like all cruelty, has a long-lasting effect. So 2 of the women in my story suffer from undiagnosed multiple personality disorder. And at the time, the disease did not have a name, and certainly there wouldn't have been any treatment, not for the slave and not generations later for her great-granddaughter. These are part of the ingredients and the elements of my story. Years ago, in the newspapers that I read at the time, there was an article written by a woman who actually did suffer from multiple personality disorder. She wrote about herself, and it was one of the most amazing things that I've ever read. It stayed with me. Now, also remember that for a fiction writer, the amount of research that is done is just to learn where I can put my imagination. So in other words, if point A is true and point E is true, I get to bring you the rest of the story in between. That's what I get to imagine. So I imagine that because of the cruelty of slavery, one of my characters, Celsi, a slave known as 2 for the price of 1, developed multiple personality disorder to help her cope with the trauma that she witnessed on a daily basis. And what if years later, her great-granddaughter developed the same disorder to deal with the traumas in her own life. Lastly, I grew up in the neighborhood where two elderly sisters had lived their entire lives in their father's house. We were told that their father was one of the first African-American attachés to ever be assigned abroad. Finally, and one most important ingredient in this story is healing. How in the world did two women, undiagnosed with no available treatment, find a way to heal themselves? For me, this could only occur in an African-American setting because above all, we often work without any kind of ordinary support to take care of ourselves. And for this writer, the facade of Blackness ought to be worn like a magic, absolutely beautiful coat of armor. One more thing, and this is changing, and I'm very happy to be a part of it. Our fiction is a very important element of our culture. The more stories we tell, the broader the story becomes. And we all know that our stories are far broader than what exists in the current American literary canon. And therein lies the story. I'd like to share one other thing for you. And this is a review from Jane Miyahara about this book. I didn't want this book to end. The story, complex and beautiful, the insight into family relationships and history, masterful, but mostly the writing was pure art. As I looked over all of the books I've read through the past few years, this book reminded me of why I love reading. Thank you, Jane Miyahara. Allowing me this small part in the celebration of African-American literature is very much appreciated. And if it sounds as if it's something unique and serendipitous has been put together, it does to me too. Writing is my way of honoring who and what I am and what we are. Asala describes part of its mission as the celebration of African-American stories, traditions, and hope. And I'm hoping that I can share a little bit of what I feel and how I'm trying to honor the same mission. Again, the story is called A Good Ending for Bad Memories. And I'm reading a part to you when the entire family is moving back to America from Cairo, where they've lived for several years. The father in the story has surprised him with this, and all of the children and family are not necessarily happy to be coming back to America. I hope I'm not reading too fast. I have that tendency. Celsi, remember, is the slave who suffered from multiple personality disorder, and Selma is her great-granddaughter. Celsi's stories were waiting up in the clouds, mixed with the horror of leaving, ready to accompany Selma to America. If anyone could come to the rescue, it was Celsi. Celsi, who shared her disorder with her great-granddaughter. Celsi was having a party too, only she was giving it, hosting it, and holding it for herself and her gentleman friend. That is, if they could come to some sort of agreement. Mostly, they were arguing about freedom. Celsi's friend had always been free, and Celsi had just earned hers, partly from hard work and partly from knowing that it would have been hers whenever she'd asked, and she'd asked. She was ready and she had wanted to celebrate. Her gentleman friend decided to put in with her and celebrate his self and his freedom too. And that's how they got to arguing. Celsi wanted to know what was the point of celebrating something now that he always had. He had wanted to know what was the difference between celebrating now, yesterday, or tomorrow. Celsi accused him of wanting to celebrate with her because he just learned the value of his own freedom by measuring it next to hers. He looked at her in such a serious way that she knew why everybody called him Lord Earl instead of Lloyd Earl. Really, they mostly pronounce it Lloyd Earl as though it were one word. Freedom ain't nothing we should be fighting over, seeing as we both got some. Boundless ain't bound to be measured. You just want to celebrate now because of mine. You ain't wanted to celebrate before. Now you know how good it is because you know the difference. Woman, if you telling me that I ain't ever had a day to celebrate, you telling me wrong. I knew the worth every morning when I never forget the price of forgetting that paper I got in my pocket to prove my freedom's true. I carries my freedom with me every day. An extra coat in the cold, more sweat in the summer, ideas in the springtime. A piece of paper in your pocket ain't nothing against a lifetime cooking the food of love for mouths you can't stand to eat with. You full of ideas, all right. You lying if you say you ain't sometimes loving them people. Love like a pain in the knee you get used to, Celsi answered him. Like when you massaging that knee, so as to make yourself feel the pain you know you love, whether you're used to it or not. My freedom deserved to be celebrated because it's new, Celsi said. Mine is old. Don't old folks still get birthdays? Mine make me smile sometimes while I'm still in the kitchen cooking for the same people I done always cook for, making the same pay I done always been paid. Girl, smiling ain't improved none on them potatoes. Now he knew she was the best cook anybody ever heard of, including him, whether he traveled around or not. She liked him and she didn't like him. She loved him, but she didn't like loving him because it made her listen even when he was talking the nonsense he was now and like he usually was. Your freedom seemed to like nonsense. Mine ain't sure, said Celsi. You ain't had yours long enough to know what it like. It don't like being told. Celsi knew that much. Neither do you. Maybe it'll be as stubborn as you. Stubborn freedom won't get up and move, won't care what's coming. She was having second thoughts about sharing anything with him, certainly not a freedom party, not the way he was talking like he knew everything about it. But he could read the question in her face, and it was a good thing, too. I'll bring the meat, you make the cake. Now, here he was telling her again what to do. He just happened to be right, like he always was most of the time. He knew it would be a party for two, just them. She'd cook his meat all right. What he didn't know, she was making him a special cake, a shut up cake. She had decided on it. She was going to make it so much, he was going to like it so much, he was going to keep eating it, and all he would be able to do was smile. What she didn't know, it would have the same effect on her. The two of them sat on a blanket in their finest clothes out in the field all day by themselves, blushing. Lloyd Earl and Celsi were immobile, stooped over the cake, stuck in with the wildflowers and weeds, blowing around them as if they belonged to the landscape. They had chosen to picnic on the rise without the shelter or comfort of trees. Other folks could see them up there, sitting way out in the field looking crazy, especially when it started to rain. The talk was freedom made Celsi crazier anyway. Celsi was a little wet when she started thinking that freedom let her sit out under the rain as long as she wanted to, and that a shut-up cake made a person quiet, so a person could use her time without the imposition of her mouth, which gave the brain a little steadier work. Then she started wondering what Lloyd Earl was thinking. She looked over at him. He could see her, still covered in as many smiles as she had started with, only now they were all wet. He knew he'd been poisoned. She was always poisoning him with whatever it was she put in the food. It seemed like it must have worked on her too, this time, as she was smiling crazily and neither of them could get one word out, whether chewing or not. Maybe freedom was going to separate her from her food. She used to be able to eat it right along with everybody else. She'd be sitting right there doing nothing while everybody else was writhing, confessing, frozen up, or changing in some way. Maybe freedom was going to free her in one way and bind her up in another. Lloyd Earl wondered if she was going to have to change her recipes, but he hoped not. She was always up in the woods, picking up secrets and weeds and putting them in her pockets. She didn't know what she didn't need. She didn't know that she didn't need to poison him for his feelings. He'd already loved her before he said one word to her, so he didn't need any of her potions for that. He'd loved her from across the road, in his own field, and even in town, especially when she came sauntering by, ignoring everybody, but knowing nobody could ignore her, not if they wanted to eat peaceably. He loved her before he ever tasted a thing from her hand. Folks made up stories about her. They said Celsi didn't know anything about the other ones. They used to bet on which Celsi could cook the best. She was the whole town's topic of conversation, more colorful than a cotton field full of rag-wearing slaves picking it, a used-to-be slave woman. Even Lloyd Earl had seen a personality or two, that is, before he got to know her well. For one thing, they had completely different strides, and he used to wonder which one might be easiest to approach. The limping one moved slower, but the haughty one once winked. One of the first things he ever said to her was that she could try all them women out on him. She told him that if he was the right man, she wouldn't need to share him, and he wouldn't even need to meet any of all them other Celsies. If you ain't, don't matter who you get to know. After they started living between her house and his, all the other Celsies moved out for good. Lloyd Earl asked for explanations, but none were forthcoming. Thank you. Thanks a lot for allowing me into the Asala's evening and festival with the books.
Hi, I'm Tanya Leake, and I'm so grateful to be here to share my book as one of the authors for the Association for the Study of African American Life and History's 2022 Black History Month Festival Celebration. I'm super excited because my book, Get a Grip, is so specifically aligned with this year's theme, which is Black health and wellness. You can't know how near and dear to my heart this theme and that topic is. My book, Get a Grip, the health and wellness movement rooted in Black cultural traditions, is itself rooted in my commitment to health and wellness, particularly in the Black community. As a certified health and wellness coach and educator, a dance, yoga, and fitness instructor, women's health wellness specialist and advocate, a laughter yoga leader, we'll talk a little bit about that later, and the founder of the Embody Well Virtual Studio and author. Let's get started. Booker T. Washington said, The future of the race depends on the conservation of its health. The irony, he said that after founding National Negro Health Week as an important celebration in the US for the Black community, and before his own death due to complications from hypertension. I found myself understanding what that quote really meant after literally breaking down the door to find a close personal friend of mine dead of similar complications on his bathroom floor. As I mourned, I realized that, like Booker T. Washington, as my friend and others that had been making a difference in the community fell victim to preventable health outcomes, disparities in health for Black people were threatening not only their individual lives, but the lives of those close to them and a loss to the broader community. And potentially, as I agree with Booker T. Washington, the future of the Black race. Because health and wellness is my passion and Black people are my community, I wanted to do something about it. What did I know? From my training as a health coach and health educator, I know that one of the most important factors in successfully maintaining good health is how easy it is for someone to make healthy practices an integral part of their lives. In my role as a lead for the Network for Healthy California's African American campaign, I came to know the incredible potential of tapping into culturally rooted activities to make that happen. The result, Get a Grip. A message, a movement, a call to action, a prescription, and a unique 5-pronged approach to Black health and eliminating Black health disparities. It's culturally targeted, it's rooted in community, it's incorporating both mind, body, and spirit. Arthur Ashe said, start from where you are, use what you have, do what you can. Get a Grip is based on the proven premise that when you start small and build slowly, change can happen more successfully. T.D. Jakes said, it is possible for you to get a grip on the thing that used to get a grip on you. We as a people have met the challenge of being persecuted and oppressed mentally and physically for hundreds of years. With Get a Grip, I hope to remind us of the things that have been integral to that survival. Namely, the grip in Get a Grip is an acronym. It stands for grub, groove, release, power, and peace. As in everything we do, when we do these things with soul, they have much more impact. And by definition, this means that each of these activities have a mind and body component. And despite the I in grip, these activities are founded in the power of not only culture, but community, or as I say it, community. What I'd like to do today is to walk you briefly through the components of Get a Grip and leave you with something practical, some active steps you can think about and take in the context of the Black community's health and well-being. But before we start and dive in, because I'm a practitioner, in honor of our traditions, our history, our health and well-being, and our future, I'm going to encourage you to join me in taking a moment to take a deep, cleansing breath together. Inhale. Exhale. Now let's start. We'll start with grub. I say true soul food is what you feed your body when you treat it like a temple. I read another quote that said, food is the central activity of mankind and one of the single most significant trademarks of a culture. One of our single most significant trademarks is soul food. Foods and preparations that not only nourish the body, but serve as sacred, soulful, nourishment for our community and culture. What many don't appreciate is that there is a healthy history and legacy to soul food. The organization Old Ways represents what they call an African heritage diet as a pyramid whose base is green leafy vegetables. You can see it here. They say it is a way of eating based on the healthy food traditions of people with African roots. In addition to the general benefits of green leafy vegetables, it is so much more significant for the health of Black folks. Hence the grub slogan, get that green. But here it means get your grub on a healthy dose of green leafy vegetables for your health. As a side note, besides additional info in my book, Asala has a wonderful session from last year's Black History Month celebration called From the Continent to the Americas, Foodways, Culture, and Traditions in the African American Family. You should definitely check it out. Next up, groove. Alice Walker is quoted as saying, hard times require furious dancing. Black people have been dancing since time immemorial. Grooving, as I call it in Get a Grip, is a strong tradition in the diaspora and everywhere Black people of African descent have traveled. Dance is also a wonderful cardiovascular training activity. And given that heart disease is the #1 killer of all Americans and Black Americans are at even greater risk, dance as something that is not only socially accepted for Black folks, but socially expected. It's potentially an easy way to consistently incorporate an exercise that not only works our physical hearts, but the hearts of our ancestors as well. The slogan of Groove is show your roots, meaning show your roots by getting your natural born groove on every day. Next up is one of my favorites, release. Zora Neale Hurston is quoted as saying, I love myself when I am laughing. And I feel exactly the same way. As we all know, the legacy of slavery has resulted in daily distress and tension for many of us, conscious and unconscious. One way we as a people have historically released that tension is through humor. In the book, Black Humor, Reflections on an American Tradition, the authors comment on the use of Black humor historically as an emotional healing balm, a rich source of creative energy, and a way of affirming our humanity. And clinical studies have also proven that laughter really is the best medicine. It can lower stress and blood pressure, increase oxygenation and circulation, and even relieve pain. The slogan for release is bust a gut, a reminder that we can bust through all of these health disparities by laughing from our gut more often. Jimi Hendrix said, with the power of soul, anything is possible. Let's talk about power. Anyone familiar with Black history knows that resistance has always been a necessary part of our tradition. At the same time, resistance training is by definition training oneself in such a way as to increase one's what? Power, whether physically or otherwise. How do we get a grip on power? The slogan of power is soul train. Because in the book, I suggest a concept and style I created that is unique to Get a Grip called soul training. Although better shown than described, but I don't have the space and time to do that now, soul training or power soul line dancing combines soul line dancing, something else we originated within the culture, with classic resistance training movements to create the kind of work we can enjoy putting in. Last, but certainly not least, there is peace. Something many of us hope for and strive toward. Marvin Gaye is quoted as saying, if you cannot find peace within yourself, you will never find it anywhere else. Get a Grip's peace is rooted in breath. Why breath? As I hope you noticed when we started, because it's about making it easy And what is easier than to start simply by taking a deep breath? Deep breathing is also the simplest way to trigger your body's relaxation response. You can think of it as the anti-stress response. Acknowledging that faith plays such an important role for so many in our community, deep meditative prayer is another way to achieve similar benefits. As a yoga instructor, I know that the mastery of breath and meditation are powerful forces in calming the mind and the body. And for those of you who didn't know, according to Hotep, the Kemetic people of ancient Kemet, Egypt, practice a style of yoga unique to them that predates the yoga of India. The slogan of peace is breathe inside out. Find peace within yourself in order to have that peace reflected outside. There's so much more to say, but it is close to my time. The book, of course, goes into much more detail on the history of Black health and well-being from National Negro Health Week and the Black Panther program, and support for the future of Black health and well-being, how you can get a grip, including a 30-day program you can do within your community, getting started, 2 methods, ease in and all in, suggested targets for each of the 5 components, planning sheets, scorecards, and all of these are designed to enable you to easily get a grip. I will leave you with another quote from Booker T. Washington. Without health, and until we reduce the high death rate, it will be impossible for us to have permanent success in business, in property getting, in acquiring education, or to show other evidences of progress. From our culture, we have a rich set of tools available to us if we choose to intentionally access and leverage them for health and well-being of ourselves and our community. If you want to find out how and get more details about how to get a grip and join the movement, visit embodywell.com/get-a-grip. And remember, it's spelled GGRIPP. Or you can always reach out to me on social media at embodywell or by email at admin@embodywell.com. Also look out for the next book, which is called Vegetabulary in a Mouthful, which will have a special section further exploring grubbing well. Thank you for your time, and I wish all of us the best of health. Grub, groove, release, power, peace, out.
Hi, my name is LaTanya Brooks, and I am happy to be here with you. I'm an author, educator, and entrepreneur. Today, I'm going to talk about my latest book, These Shoulders I Stand On, a historical journey from Sojourner Truth to Kamala Harris, because I stand on the shoulders of many women who came before me. In fact, these women are the reason I can speak freely, exercise many of the rights that most men have always been privy to all along, Um, I'm going to be reading some excerpts from the book a little later, but for now, I just want to give you a little synopsis of the book and just talk about what motivated me to write this book. So, many women in this book, These Shoulders I Stand On, open doors for all women, elevated our position in society, and gave us a resounding voice. Throughout time, there have been many courageous women who broke down barriers so that women today can have a voice and an enriched life. These shoulders I stand on tell a story in chronological order of triumphs and tribulations experienced by women in the early days leading up to today. This beautiful illustrated book makes use of vibrant colors and rhyme and rhythm as it highlights contributions of 28 out of countless marginalized women. And these are all women who positively impact the world perception of all women. With each generation, women continue to make great strides to elevate their prominence in society while manifesting strength, brilliance, grace, courage, faith, and yes, heart. From freedom fighter Sojourner Truth to relentless U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, a remarkable poetic thread weaves through inspiring pursuits and accomplishments for many stunning women throughout human history. With each woman, there's a lesson to be taught and learned. Odds are real, struggles are daunting. Difficulties respect no age, race, or gender, but they can all be overcome. My hope is that readers will learn history and victories presented in short, fun, and impactful lines that paint a picture of hope, audacity, and girl power. To me, the year 2020 was revolutionary. Women came out in droves to run for public office. Not just women, but African American women. With Kamala Harris being elected to the office as vice president, this picture kept popping up on all social media. It showed Kamala walking with her briefcase alongside Ruby Bridges' silhouette. And I remember it said that Ruby sat, Rosa sat. It said Rosa sat so Ruby could walk so Kamala could run. That is so true. To me, that was both powerful and inspirational. That was all the inspiration I needed to write my book. I was filled with so much pride as words and thoughts flowed from my brain and landed onto the pages. I set out to write a few amazing poems about amazing women, maybe 4 or 5. Well, a few turned into over 2 dozen. And then after that, what do you know? That turns into a whole coffee book. This timeless book highlights some of the greatest accomplishments of women such as Shirley Chisholm, Malala Yousafzai, Claudette Colvin, Daisy Bates. And in the back of the book, there are many bios that provide just enough info about each lady to pique one's curiosity and make you want to know more about each one of these amazing women, especially the ones you've never heard of. Now, I will be reading some poems from my book. So here we go. Oops, and my other book just fell. Harriet Tubman. Okay. Then came Harriet Tubman, who escaped from terrible slavery. She is commended today for selfless acts and bravery. After gaining her freedom, Harriet helped others escape. Slaveholders stood all distressed with their mouths agape. Ida B. Wells. Ida B. perplexed and disdained by what she would see. Miss Wells knew somehow deep inside that this should not be. Often scorned and excluded for showing such strength. You see, women back then weren't supposed to bend. As an activist and journalist, she exposed unfair truths of racial issues and politics that plagued and threatened Black youth. Okay, so here's one about Claudette Colvin and Rosa Parks. I kind of grouped those together. Claudette Colvin and Rosa Parks. Young Claudette Colvin was only 15 years old when she made a move that was radical and bold. Later, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. Miss Parks wasn't quite ready to accept defeat. These revolutionary moves started a popular trend. Blacks all stood together and fought for segregation to end. Let's see who's next. Daisy Bates. At such a time in history when many women were submissive to men, Bates was a publisher, lecturer, and activist who forced her way in. The famous March in Washington in 1963, the men stood together and spoke just as proudly and free. Bates was the only woman there given a spot on the stage. In step with her male counterparts, she spoke out in utter rage. With a strong demeanor and sprayed stance, up Daisy Bates stood as she gave a tribute to women. Well, as much as she could. Maya Angelou, who was indeed a famous poet laureate, spoke out on many social issues that encompass blood, tears, and sweat. Maya Angelou reminded me that still I rise. She was a phenomenal woman in the world's eyes. Angelou understood the heart of a woman, yet different, there's much that we all have in common. Refusal to be caged birds or to settle for less, and always a woman striving to be our best. Who is this brilliant lady who stood among the best? A talented mathematician whose works led to GPS. Her beautiful name is Gladys Mae West, another hidden treasure who was impervious to ridicule and mounting public pressure. She realized that the journey to being her very best meant working through the scrutiny and being put to the test. With her being a woman meant working harder than others. Dr. West, a role model for all daughters and mothers. Shirley Chisholm. Chisholm's mantra, unbossed and unbought, was her fervent battle cry that served as a bold symbol of hope as a new role caught her eye. You see, Shirley Chisholm had the audacity to run for the position of president. All her skills and sheer determination were all very abundantly evident. She was the first African-American woman who dared to attempt such a difficult feat. But Chisholm gave no credence to such trepidation because she was charged with a job to complete. I promise I'm not gonna read them all to you. Okay, I like this lady because she's from Houston, Texas, like me. So, and she went to one of the HBCUs that's really close to my heart. So, Barbara Jordan. The first Black woman to serve as governor for a day, Barbara Jordan proved where there is a will, there is a way. A proud graduate from an HBCU, magna cum laude, honored at GSU. No Black woman at all from the South had ever served in Congress. That is, until Jordan came along, as smart as she was dauntless. She became the first woman ever to hold a Senate seat. Although she felt very accomplished, her job was not at all complete. She was such a moral compass who stood for human rights, upholding the Constitution in every legal fight. And the final poem that I'm going to read is Michelle Obama. Michelle Obama, as a lawyer, author, and loving mother of two, Michelle had to prepare for what was about to ensue. Her proud husband was elected as the commander-in-chief. Having a positive impact was always her belief. Michelle advocated for health, education, and human rights, paving the way for a future that is prosperous and so bright. America's first African American First Lady, Michelle is full of honor and grace. Now, whenever I look at such a remarkable lady, I can envision my own face. So this book, the cover of the book has a picture of my daughter on it. And I also have a picture of her inside because I dedicated this book to my beautiful daughter, Cam. Well, I originally dedicated it to Cam, but today I'm dedicating this book to all mothers and daughters because you stand on the shoulders of amazing, determined, and brilliant women that came before you. Now, you must make your mark on the world. Life is too precious to live in a bubble. Step out. Embrace this world with your God-given talent to make this world better for posterity. Most importantly, be bold, be strong, be unapologetically you. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I'm honored to present my book. As you can see from this slide, the title is Arise, Africa, Roar, China, Black and Chinese Citizens of the World in the 20th Century. Okay. As you can see, you can purchase this book at the UNC website for $23 with a 40% discount using this code. So as this cover illustrates, this book focuses on the lives and political activism of these 5 citizens of the world. It explores their global interactions, particularly their passages over the murky and often treacherous trans-Pacific political and ideological landscapes. Okay. So for most of the audiences here, I understand those most famous 20th century African Americans, and W.E.B. Du Bois, and Paul Robeson, and Leslie Hughes need no introduction. However, their Chinese allies, Liu Liangmo here, and Silan Chen, and once they were well known, but since have been consigned in the dustbin of history. Therefore, I would like to take a few seconds to explain who they were a little bit here for you. First, Liu Liangmo. He was a prolific journalist, talented musician, and a Christian activist who most famously initiated the Trans-Pacific mass singing movement for war mobilization during the Second World War. And he pioneered in collaborating with African Americans and lauded for Chinese, the Black greatness without a reservation. He was first one doing that. And also he facilitated the warm receptions of W.E.B. Du Bois and Paul Robeson in the People's Republic of China. So here, if you want to know more about him quickly, and you can see here, there's a link to a talk about Liu Liangmo I did for University of Michigan. Okay, and so Then Silanchen. She was the first Chinese Soviet modern dancer of international reputation. And she happened to be associated with a few important figures. First, she was a one-time romantic partner of Lahnice Hollister. And also she was a daughter of, let's go to the next slide. This is her name. And she was a daughter of Eugene Chen, the foreign minister of China in the 1920s, and his French Creole wife. Okay. And also she was a cousin of Dai Lian, the acclaimed mother of modern dance in China. Okay. So by the way, and both Chens and Dai Lian were born in Trinidad. So therefore, none of them, actually speak, how to put this, and all of them barely spoke Chinese. Okay, so that was the story here. So Silanchen captured the fanciful gazes and imaginations of Robeson and Hughes. They imagined and portrayed her as the person who embodied the perfect union between Black and Chinese. And however, as my book illustrated, her journey to choreograph and dance ethnicity, war and revolution across the globe revealed that there were much more complex racial and political twists with such interracial union. Okay, so that's basically what this book is about. Okay, so next question I would like to explore is what bound these five figures together. Above all, the solidarity of the colored world in their shared destiny of anti-colonialism and anti-racism, and bound them together. Okay. Meanwhile, their political ties were built on a profound emotional and intellectual foundation, underlined by their shared faith and belief in the Sino-Afro racial and cultural kinship. Okay, like we are brothers, we are cousins. Okay, and so look at next slide, as illustrated by Lahnice Hollister. He observed that Chinese were very jolly people, much like folks at home. His sentiment was echoed later on by Liu Liangmo. For Du Bois, and he lauded Chinese as my physical cousins. In this poem, I Sing to China, of 1959 poem, as you can see, he wrote grandly and romantically. That sun which burned my father's ebony rolled your limbs in gold and made us both cousins of the stars. Okay, so that's it. Directly comparative works of those famed African Americans were rare, and discussions of individual Afro-Chinese relationships are even harder to find. So my book makes a difference in exploring the intertwined lives of these individuals, commonly perceived as occupying non-overlapping domains. And it examines how they interacted, how these citizens of the world interacted in many different ways. At times, they collaborated and contributed to historical partnerships. At other times, and they fell in and out of love. Okay, and so let's take Robeson and Liu Liangmo as examples. Among many domains or many areas of their collaboration, they popularized. Let's go to the third slide. They popularized the signature song for the Trans-Pacific mass singing movement I just mentioned before. So this song's title was called Qi Lai, and also called March of the Volunteers. Okay. So this song was later adopted by the People's Republic of China. So that's why you always hear right now at Olympics or on other occasions. Okay, so right now I would like to switch to a YouTube video to give you a brief taste of Robinson's version of this song. Okay. Oh, sorry, that's not the right one. Share screen, where's the video? What's right here? Okay, let me start to play.
This is a song born in the struggle of the brave Chinese people.
Okay,
It begins, Qi Lai, arise, you who refuse to be bond slave, and ends, Chen Jing, march on. Qi Lai，不许往所努力的人们，把我们的血肉组成我们新的长城。中华民族到了最危险的时候，每个人被迫就发出最好的号声。起来，起来，起来！我们万众一心，冒着敌人的炮火前进，冒着敌人的炮火前进，前进，前进。Arise, you who refuse to be bond slaves. Let's stand up and fight for liberty and true democracy. All our world is facing the chains of the tyrant. Everyone who works for freedom is now crying. Arise, arise, arise. All of us with one heart, with the torch of freedom, march on, with the torch of freedom, march on, march on, march on and on.
Let me move forward a little bit. You can hear Liu Liang's voice a little bit, just very briefly.
Work as one. This song expresses the spirit of cooperation and unity in New China.
Okay, let's stop here. Okay. Let's go back to my slide. Okay. So, if you are interested in learning more about Paul Robeson and China, some quick sources here. You can see two links here. One, this is a recording of my talk about him and China at Cornell University. This is a short article I contribute to the conversation. Okay. So, next point. Obviously, such transnational and cultural cultural history requires a multilingual approach to thoroughly and comprehensively examine the massive yet rarely used sources in China, in Chinatowns, the United States, and the Great Britain. So my exhaustive research enables this book to transform and redefine Afro-Asian studies, and as put by an anonymous reviewer of my book manuscript. Okay, so finally, what kind of contributions does this book make? And to put in one sentence, it breaks new grounds for the familiar stories of W.E.B. Du Bois and Robeson and Leslie Hughes, even beyond their official biographies, and also bring back to life the sagas of Liu Liangmo and Si Lanzhi. This could be break down in 4 important aspects. Let me explain. First, normally scholarships about Sino-African relations, they treat the United States as default white. And so I set a new path by foregrounding African Americans in this process. Okay. So by doing so, it allows us to reimagine Sino-American relations, okay? And by decentering the narratives about Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon, okay? And helping us to understand Afro-Asian history as a center of global history and focus on global anti-colonialism and popular movement, which are still relevant today. That's one. Second, my book combines Black internationalism with China and Chinese Americans with a trans-Pacific narrative. And so one reader who recommends this book put it this way, and I thought it was pretty neat. Let me read very quickly for you. So what Du Bois, Robeson, and Hughes have in common? And what if I told you that part of that answer was deep engagement with China and Chinese Americans? Okay. So that's my second contribution. Third, this book reviews much earlier and widespread interactions between leftist Chinese figures and Black ones. There's a familiar alliances between Black radicals and the Maoist China. Okay. So that's the third contribution. And fourth, this whole process reveals the global making and remaking of modern Chinese popular culture and politics. It traces China's transnational entanglements, even during the time period where the nation was viewed as cut or was isolated from the wider world. Okay, so to conclude, and together, the lives and career of these 5 citizens of the world stand powerfully as counters to the popular narratives which highlight racism and alienation. Okay, Arise Africa, Raw China, as articulated by W.E.B. Du Bois and Leslie Hughes respectively, and matched the shared struggles between China as a nation and African Americans as a nation within a nation. Okay, their power and a promise still resonate very powerfully, strongly until today. Okay, so that's my talk. Thank you again for joining me tonight. And so I hope our conversations about this extraordinary 5 citizens of the world would continue beyond my brief presentation today. And enjoy the rest of your evening and stay well. Thank you again.